There was this guy who built roads for a living. Really good roads, long roads, short roads, any roads. And over the years, he began to quietly buy a little bit of land here and a little bit of land there. But nobody had noticed that he was buying up all this land. And people in the town began talking about wanting a new highway. And by the time had noticed that this person had bought all the roads and had been maintaining all these roads, they said, hey, who better to talk to about this than the road builder? And this man, very quietly, stayed in the shadows and just did his thing. And one day, somebody was walking in front of his home and decided to ask him, how come you own all this? The man said it was never about him. And technically, he was right. Now, let me tell you why. Our prime minister used to be the chair of one of the biggest investment firms on the planet for 5 years, managing over $15 billion. And one day, he becomes prime minister. And then almost immediately, as prime minister, his government starts pushing all the exact same sectors that the firm he used to work for already owns a bunch of pieces of. Nuclear energy, carbon capture, data centers, modular housing, gas infrastructure, renewables infrastructure, public and private partnerships backed by pension money. Yeah. So I guess here's the most obvious question at this point. Was this really just all really good policy the prime minister thought of? Or was it something else? Did that man that came to town have other plans? But here's another follow-up question that I don't think that the government really wants you and me to ask at all. Does it really even matter? Because here's what I found. Our ethics laws, as we covered in part 1, are not just something you could skirt around. No, apparently you could drive a $50 billion highway straight through this ethics loophole and nobody would do anything or can't do anything. So let's start with the basics, because the media really didn't cover the basics at all during the election. They kind of glossed over it. If you watched part 1 of the last report that I did, and if you didn't, I strongly urge you do before you continue this, you're going to know that Mark Carney basically worked for one of the most prestigious companies in the world, made a whole ton of money, yada, yada, yada. And we also know that he still is tied to how that company does as it relates to how much he gets to make. So this dude has a stake in this. This is all you need to remember right now for what's about to come. Now, here's where it gets specific, and I'm talking really specific, so bear with me. In September of 2024, while Mark Carney was chair at Brookfield, many of you know this, but he was also advising Justin Trudeau at the same time. At that time, what many people don't know is that Brookfield put forth a proposal to the government, and they called it the Maple Fund. They pitched a $50 billion domestic investment plan to the government, and it was supposed to be in the form of a fund, a pooled fund. $36 billion of that was supposed to come from Canada's largest pension organization. The pitch, $50 billion for domestic investment funding. 36 of that from Canada's largest pension funds. 10 billion from that was supposed to come from the federal government, and 4 billion was supposed to come from Brookfield itself. And Brookfield had this crazy idea. Hey, let's run it. We're going to run it. And what did they want to invest in? This is the part of the video where you need to really pay attention and remember, because this will be a recurring pattern here. Housing, physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, renewable energy, carbon capture, data centers, nuclear energy, telecom. So what Brookfield is basically asking for is, hey, give us some federal money, give us a ton of pension money, and we'll throw in our money and we'll pull everything together and we'll manage it. In the exact same sectors where we have all of our assets in. Now, did the pension funds jump at this? No. Did Ottawa jump at this? No. The proposal, like one trade publication basically put it, remained on paper, quote unquote. But here's where that same publication wrote this even before Mark Carney became prime minister. Carney may well revive it if he wins Canada's snap general election. What's he going to revive? The Maple Fund. Nobody talks about that. This wasn't opposition research conservative party NDP saying this. This was the institutional investment press who's saying this. Basically, the people who cover pension funds, who do this for a living, who are already connecting the dots here. If any of you are also familiar with publications that are very well known in Canada, particularly as it relates to business, is The Logic. They were the first outlet that essentially broke the Maple Fund story, and really where I stumbled on this. But I decided to go even further. They said that sources told them that the conflict of interest involving Brookfield's Mark Carney, because he wasn't prime minister at the time, while he was simultaneously advising Justin Trudeau, would have prevented the fund from going further. Ergo, the conflict was flagged. In public, might I add. Fast forward, Mark Carney resigns from Brookfield. We're at January 16th at this point, 2025. He won the Liberal leadership, and 3 months later, on April 28th, he became prime minister. That's 3 months. Resigns as chair of Brookfield. After having tried to pitch this whole thing, becomes prime minister. That's one hell of an arc. Either this is a downgrade for this guy, or there's something amiss here. And I will remind you of that road builder story. And as soon as he becomes prime minister, he begins to announce things, him and his government. $2 billion from the Canada Growth Fund for small modular reactors at Darlington. That's nuclear energy. $925 million for sovereign AI, computing infrastructure. Data centers. $13 billion for Build Canada homes, with a specific mandate for factory-built and modular housing. Modular housing, the housing sector. A BDC fund of funds designed to incentivize institutional investors to back domestic projects, pension money into infrastructure. Then you see a mandate letter with language saying that Canada must build an enormous amount of new infrastructure at speeds not seen in generation. I heard that before. Infrastructure. And then at the Canada Investment Summit, the first ever, by the way, co-hosted by the Canadian Pension Plan Investments Organization, CPP, and Public Sector Pensions, PSP, the exact pension funds that Brookfield, while Carney was there, was pitching the Maple Fund to. So let's pretend we're living in an actual reality where clowns are not pretending that none of us see this shit. Does the list that I just gave you sound familiar? Housing, physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, renewable energy and carbon capture, data centers, nuclear, and telecom. Almost exactly the list that the Maple Fund, which was being pitched to the Liberal government with Justin Trudeau, when Brookfield pitched that $50 billion Maple Fund. It's word for word, except now, scary scenario, it's government policy, and it's backed by public money. The question I kept asking myself, the more I kept looking at this Maple Fund blueprint was, is Mark Carney running Canada, or is Brookfield the one that's now running Canada? Is there a special office in Brookfield that's designed and called the Office of the PMO? Brookfield doesn't just invest in like random sectors and stuff like that. No, they have a very specific taste, and they've had a very specific taste now for very long, ever since Mark Carney was actually stationed at Brookfield. And all those sectors that we had named above, you know, housing, physical infrastructure, nuclear, all that bullshit, well, they have investments in these, and you need to know about them. So when it comes to nuclear, they own Westinghouse Electric. They build reactors, essentially. Carbon capture, Brookfield put $300 million into a company that they own called Entropy. And then the Canada Growth Fund, you know, that federal company that Carney's pitching to everyone, decided, yeah, let's put $200 million more into that. Remember the public sector pension plan investment people? Yeah, they're also in that deal. The guys that take care of the federal pension plan are in on this deal. 3 pots of money, 1 company, all of them overlap. You want to talk about gas and midstream infrastructure? Well, Brookfield owns North River Midstream. North River's CEO wrote an open letter 2 days after Mark Carney became prime minister, asking for funding and infrastructure support. North River's actively registered to lobby the prime minister's office. They're still up there. You want to talk about data centers? Brookfield owns, you want to talk about data center? Brookfield co-controls Compass, and they own 100% stake in Data 4. You want to talk about data centers? Brookfield co-controls the company Compass, and they have a 100% ownership over a company called Data 4, a major European data center operator. And the combined investment between these two, billions. Modular housing? Brookfield owns Modular Group. They bought them in 2021. For how much? $5 billion. And what's the government's initiative right now? Build Canada homes at record speeds never seen before. Yeah, we're going to put them into modular fabrication of houses. I could do this. I can do that. I could do whatever you want. You want to talk about renewables? Brookfield owns a company called Evolution. They're already in the clean power grid, making money. So when the federal Carney government pushes nuclear energy, Westinghouse wins. When it pushes carbon capture credits, Entropy wins. Data infrastructure, Compass and Data 4 win. And what do all these people have in common? Brookfield. I mean, Brookfield doesn't need to be named in every single line of policy at this point so that the policy could benefit Brookfield. That's the bullshit here. In other words, not every store you visit needs to have a big B on it for it to belong to Brookfield. I mean, I thought it was bad, like with Justin Trudeau, but this feels like we're out of the frying pan and, I don't know, into a detonation device bad at this point. And honestly, it gets worse. Remember in that last video in part 1 when I showed you that video and I told you that you should go back and watch part 1 to understand this whole ethics and conflict of ethics and interest, and all this other stuff? Yeah, it's important that you probably go go back and watch that. But particularly in that section in 2.1, in the last video that I made to you, we talked a lot about how the Conflict of Interest Act worked with Mark Carney's conflicts and how they were allowing him to basically skirt around this. And you already all know that have watched it. But here's what you did not know. Our ethics commissioner, who sounds incidentally like a Swiss Bond villain, Conrad von Finkenstein, he testified in December of last year. And I quote, "It is clear Mr. Carney's future compensation is tied to the success of Brookfield." And then he said the most obvious part, because of course, why not? The law permits this sort of thing and he is fully compliant with the act. To make matters worse, we end up finding out that the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Sabia, who is supposed to be the one surveilling Mark Carney to make sure that he doesn't have any conflicts of interest, he himself had shares in Brookfield and was flagged by the Bond villain, Wittgenstein, and told him, you need to sell all that off. And thankfully he did, but what does that tell you? We have the guy watching him saying, yeah, you can't be having no Brookfield shares. I have some. So the guy that was supposed to be guarding and screening the prime minister had literally skin in the game. Make it's getting so old to say this. So basically what we have is a prime minister whose future bonus pay, potentially in the tens of millions of dollars, is tied to a fund whose assets nobody surveilling him can fully identify. And our weak ass law says, sure, why not? Canada. So this is where I'm basically going to land. And I only have really 3 questions and they're still open and nobody's answered them yet. The first question that I have is, was Carney personally involved in pitching to the federal government under Justin Trudeau the Maple Fund investment strategy for $50 billion that had a very eerie repetition of all the sectors that he's deciding to build on right now through all the various initiatives: housing, physical infrastructure, data infrastructure, nuclear energy, renewables, carbon capture. All that was in the Maple Fund pitch. And now we're seeing it played out here. And we had a press article that said, yeah, he might bring that back. And that's a lot of conflict because this guy has a lot of investment he's been building up when he was the CEO there. Yeah, and if there is information out there about this, I think it needs to be published, like right away. The second question I have is, the Canada Investment Summit is being co-hosted by CPP and PSP, the pension plan investment companies. The question I have, the company that Brookfield at the time was basically pitching to. The question I have is the investment architecture that the Maple Fund was laying out in its strategy with these pension funds for various sectoral investments, does anyone have a copy of what those sectors are going to be, and so that we could at least check if Brookfield is in every single one of these sectors and how much do they stand to gain? The third question I have is, and really this is more about the ethics at this point. The ethics screen has been invoked now 6 times. I know that 4 are still active. 2 were basically dismissed and then closed on the grounds that it was just something to do with taxes and shit. And the way that they labeled it was all under general tax measures. General tax measures that benefit the sectors, including, and presumably, companies and sectors where Brookfield has billions and billions of dollars invested. If that's the system working as the way it's meant to be designed, then the design that we have is this problem. And that's the way that our laws are framed. Let me back up. To me, the issue wasn't whether or not Mark Carney was or was not a crook. It was at one point the biggest thing after this whole saga of what I've been investigating. But I've discovered a bigger issue. And that issue is not whether or not Mark Carney is a crook. The real issue here, that the system we have as a country makes it impossible or practically impossible to ever know if someone's doing this or acting as a crook. You can have sector-wide benefits without any specific company names. We have a loophole that the law created itself, and no one's going to plug this until another government comes in and decides to do the right thing. And we have, lastly, a screen, an ethics screen, where people that work for the prime minister are supposed to watch over the prime minister, and they only know what only 1% of his investments look like out of everything that he owns. I think the bribe that everyone is looking for, like between him and Brookfield, that doesn't exist anymore for me at all. There's no bribes here. There's no backroom deals. There's no envelopes. There doesn't need to be. And to me, that's the scary part. And it should scare you too.